The message came in broken, crackling waves, like something had chewed through the signal before letting it pass. It reached the Galactic Cooperative Council chambers at 0300 hours, deep in the sleep cycle of the station. The automated systems flagged it as priority red, a distress beacon from Sector 7, a distant arm of the galaxy that most council members barely remembered existed on any map. Ambassador Valoran of the Ithran people was the first to wake and read it. He sat at the edge of his sleeping pod, his four pale eyes scanning the holographic display floating above his palm. His thin fingers trembled, not from cold but from something else. Something older. Fear. The message read. This is Governor Linda Marsh of the Kepler 9 human colony, Outpost Vega 7. We are under sustained attack. Repeat, sustained attack. The Vreth fleet arrived 11 days ago. We have no military assets. We have no orbital defense. We have 12,000 civilian men, women, and children in underground shelters. The Vreth have begun landing ground troops. They are not here to occupy. They are here to harvest. I repeat, they are here to harvest. We are begging the Galactic Cooperative for immediate military intervention. Please, please, we have children here. Someone help us. Please respond. The message ended. Then it looped. Governor Linda Marsh's voice, calm at the start, cracking by the middle, and breaking entirely by the end, played again through the silence of the council chamber. Ambassador Valoran stared at the ceiling for a long time. The Vreth. Even the name made something cold crawl up his spine. The Vreth were not conquerors in any traditional sense. They did not want land. They did not want resources in the mineral meaning of the word. What they wanted, what they had always wanted since they first emerged from the dark edge of the Outer Rim, was biological material. Living biological material. Harvested. Processed. Used. They had done it to the Pelorian people of Sector 3 40 years ago. 12 million Pelorians. Gone in 6 weeks. Not killed, harvested. Catalogued. Stored in Vreth biotanks like grain in a silo. The galaxy had shuddered. The cooperative had held emergency sessions. Grand speeches had been made. And then the Vreth had gone quiet for 4 decades. Long enough for the galaxy to exhale. And now they were back. And they had found humans. Valoran pressed the emergency summons. Within 20 minutes, 14 ambassadors from 14 member species were sitting in the council chamber in various states of exhaustion and alarm, their holographic avatars flickering in and out of focus as they connected from their home worlds and deep space stations. The message played for all of them. They sat in silence when it ended. The first to speak was Ambassador Gresh of the Thovari, a species of large, slow-moving amphibians who communicated in deep resonant tones that required translation software to render into anything approaching conversational speed. The Vreth. That was all he said. Just the name. Just 2 syllables. But the weight in his voice said everything. Confirmed, said Valoran. Fleet signature analysis matches the Vreth bioharvester class. 17 ships. The colony has no defenses. It is a human colony, said Ambassador Siv of the Nathi, a small insectoid species known for their precise record-keeping and their tendency to state facts as though they were arguments. Humans have only been registered cooperative members for 31 years. Their military technology is Class 4 at best. Their fastest ships require 11 days to reach that sector. The attack has already been ongoing for 11 days, said Valoran. The room processed that. 11 days. 12,000 humans. The Vreth moved fast once they touched ground. What assets can the cooperative deploy to Sector 7? Asked Ambassador Lyrine of the Salathi, a tall crystalline species whose emotional states were expressed through the shifting colors of their translucent skin. Right now Lyrine was a deep, anxious violet. The Council's military advisor, a stocky Corvani named Commander Death, pulled up the deployment map. His mechanical arm clicked as he manipulated the holographic display. The nearest cooperative military force is the 3rd Combined Fleet, he said. Currently stationed at Talos Station, Sector 4. Transit time? Asked Valoran. To Sector 7? Death's jaw tightened. 32 days. Silence. The colony will be gone in 32 days, said Valoran quietly. Yes, said Death. More silence. There must be something closer, said Ambassador Lyrine, her colors shifting toward desperate orange. Death hesitated. Valoran noticed it immediately. He had served with Death for 12 years. The commander did not hesitate without reason. Commander Death, Valoran said carefully. Is there something closer? Death set his jaw. He pulled up a different map, one that wasn't on the standard council overlay. one that required a special clearance code to access. There is one asset in Sector 6, he said. Transit time from Sector 6 to Sector 7, 4 days. The council leaned forward collectively. What asset? Asked Ambassador SIV. Death looked around the room. His expression was the expression of a man who had just opened a door he wasn't sure he should have opened. File designation, Project Caro, he said. Classification, Extreme. 1 unit. Currently in standby containment at Research Outpost Sigma, 11. Caro, said Ambassador Gresh slowly. His translation software gave the word a flat, neutral rendering, but the ambassador himself made a sound underneath it. A deep, involuntary subvocal rumble that in Thovri physiology meant something close to dread. What is Caro? Asked Ambassador Lyrine. Death met her eyes. It's a human, he said. The chamber went very quiet. A human, repeated SIV. You are telling me our nearest deployable military asset is a single human? Not a standard human, said Death. The file is classified, but given the situation, I'm requesting an emergency disclosure vote to brief the council. He paused. I will say this much before we vote. The research team at Sigma, 11 have had Caro in containment for 6 years. In that time he has made 11 escape attempts. He succeeded in 9 of them. Each time the outpost security teams, consisting of over 200 trained personnel, were required to recapture him. Average time to recapture, 6 days. The violet of Ambassador Lyrine's skin deepened. And you are suggesting we send this individual, alone, against 17 Vreth ships and their ground forces? Asked Veloran. I am not suggesting anything, said Death. I am informing the council of available assets. What you do with that information is your decision. The vote for disclosure passed 14-0. Death opened the file. And the council read about Marcus Cole. The file was long. It was detailed. It was, in several places, difficult to read, not because the language was complex, but because some of what was described in those pages pushed against the boundaries of what most species in the cooperative considered possible for a biological organism. Marcus Cole. Born 38 years ago on Earth, the human home world, in a place called Montana. A region of vast open terrain, harsh winters, and a human cultural tradition of self-reliance that bordered, by the standards of most civilized species, on aggressive stubbornness. His early records were unremarkable by human standards. Exceptional by the standards of almost every other species in the cooperative, but humans used words like exceptional differently than everyone else did, so this fact had initially been missed by the cooperative researchers who first evaluated him. He had served in a human military unit called Special Operations, a designation that, when the cooperative's xenobiologists first encountered it, they had assumed was an administrative classification. It was not. It was a classification for humans who had been specifically selected, trained, and shaped to operate in conditions that would kill most members of their own species. The file noted, in a dry scientific tone that somehow made the content more unsettling, that Marcus Cole had survived situations that the cooperative's own medical teams had, after the fact, calculated should have been fatal with near certainty. Not low probability. Near certainty. The kind of certainty that, in any other species, would have simply meant death and a sad notation in a personnel file. Marcus Cole had survived being buried under 12 meters of collapsed tunnel for 71 hours. He had survived exposure to a vacuum seal breach for 43 seconds, long enough that 3 cooperative biologists had written papers arguing afterward that no human could possibly survive such exposure, before being forced to retract their papers when confronted with the fact that this particular human had not only survived but had, upon rescue, asked for food before asking for medical attention. He had survived a Vreth encounter. That line stopped every council member cold. A Vreth encounter. The file detailed it sparingly, because the research team's own understanding of exactly what had happened was incomplete. 7 years ago, a Vreth scouting party, 4 bioharvesters elite class, had been found on the edge of Sector 6. They had been investigating human population data. Standard pre-harvesting reconnaissance. They had encountered Marcus Cole. The cooperative research team, responding to an automated distress signal from the Vreth scout vessel, had arrived to find 4 Vreth bioharvesters. All 4 were dead. The manner of their deaths had required a 40-page forensic report to adequately describe, and even then the lead researcher had appended a personal note at the end of the report that read verbatim, "I have been a xenobiologist for 30 years. I have studied the biology of 47 species. I do not have a satisfactory framework for explaining what I observed at this site. I will simply note that whatever was done to these Vreth was done by one human, using no technology in approximately 4 minutes. I am choosing not to speculate further. After that incident, the cooperative had brought Marcus Cole in. Politely at first, then less politely. He was now at Research Outpost Sigma 11 in Sector 6. He was cooperative in the sense that he had not actually killed any of the research staff. He was uncooperative in the sense that he made his feelings about his containment extremely clear, regularly, and in ways that were increasingly creative. The file ended with a psychological assessment written by Dr. Naravel, a Ithran cognitive specialist who had spent 3 years studying Marcus Cole directly. The assessment's final paragraph read, "Subject Cole is fully aware of what he is capable of, and what the cooperative fears about him. He does not appear to resent this fear. He appears, if anything, to find it mildly amusing. He has expressed, on multiple occasions, a desire to be useful. He has expressed frustration, controlled but genuine, at what he perceives as the cooperative's decision to lock up the tool instead of using it." When asked directly what he would do if released, his answer was consistent across 17 separate interviews. Whatever needs doing. When asked to clarify, he said, "Whatever needs doing." He declined to elaborate further. The council sat with all of this for a long moment. Then Ambassador Valoran spoke. "We are not sending him," he said. "Valoran," began Death. "We are not sending a single human, one human, against the Vreth," said Valoran. His voice was firm. "It is not a viable military option. It is not a humane option. It is barely an option at all. We will accelerate the Third Combined Fleet. We will send emergency communications to every cooperative member with vessels in the adjacent sectors. We will pursue every diplomatic channel with the Vreth simultaneously. We will. And in 32 days, said Death quietly, when the fleet arrives, we will find 12,000 harvested humans in Vreth biotanks." The silence that followed was absolute. Valoran looked at the looping message on the display. Governor Linda Marsh's voice cracking on the word "please." "Please." He closed his eyes. "Send the communications," he said. "Mobilize everything we can move. And," he stopped. "And contact Sigma 11. Brief them on the situation. Do not release Caro. But brief them." It wasn't a yes. It wasn't quite a no either. And everyone in the room knew it. Research Outpost Sigma 11 existed in the kind of quiet that outer space installations sometimes developed. Not the warm quiet of a comfortable home, but the specific, pressurized quiet of a place that had learned to hold its breath. Dr. Naravel walked the corridor toward Block 7 with the measured pace she had cultivated over 3 years of regular visits. Not too fast. Not too slow. She had learned early on that Marcus Cole noticed everything. The speed of her footsteps, the slight variations in her breathing, the millisecond differences in how long she paused before opening the observation window. He noticed all of it. And he filed all of it away with the calm, methodical precision of someone who had spent a professional lifetime turning information into advantage. Block 7 was the most secure section of Sigma 11. It wasn't the most technologically sophisticated, the outpost didn't have unlimited budget, but it was the most carefully designed. 6 layers of barrier. 2 redundant atmospheric isolation systems. 16 cameras covering every angle with 0 blind spots. A team of 40 security personnel on rotating shifts. They had needed all of it. Dr. Vell stopped at the outer access panel, pressed her palm to the scanner and spoke her clearance code. The door opened. She walked through 3 more checkpoints, each manned by guards who looked at her with the particular expression of people who had accepted a dangerous job and were quietly reconsidering it on a daily basis. At the final checkpoint, a reinforced observation room separated from Block 7's main cell by transparent aluminum a full foot thick. She sat down in her chair, activated her recording equipment, and pressed the communication panel. "Good morning, Marcus," she said. Pause. "Morning, Doc," said Marcus Cole. His voice came through the speaker system with a slight electronic flatness, but even through that flatness, it carried something. A quality. Not threatening, not immediately, not obviously. But the kind of voice that made you aware, at a low level, that you were talking to someone who was very comfortable with things that most people were not comfortable with. He was sitting in the center of the room, cross-legged on the floor. He didn't look at the camera. He rarely did. He was doing what he did most mornings, working through some kind of slow, deliberate physical exercise that the research team had spent considerable time trying to categorize and had eventually filed under unknown human military movement practice. He was, by any aesthetic standard a civilized species might apply, unremarkable. Medium height for a human. Dark hair cut short. A face that was neither handsome nor ugly, the kind of face that you could walk past in a crowd and forget immediately, which Dr. Vell had come to understand was almost certainly intentional. He was 38 years old and looked like whatever age made you the least memorable. But she had watched this man do things that made her stomach drop even in memory. She had watched the footage from the night of his fifth escape attempt, when he had, using nothing but his bare hands and apparently 17 minutes of patience, dismantled a section of wall that the engineering team had certified as structurally impenetrable. She had watched the footage from the night of his eighth escape attempt, when he had somehow convinced 3 security guards to voluntarily open 2 successive checkpoints through what the post-incident analysis had described as sustained psychological pressure of an unprecedented nature. She had watched the footage from his 9th escape attempt, the one where he had actually gotten fully outside the outpost, into the vacuum of space, with nothing but a maintenance suit he had modified in his cell over 6 weeks, and had managed to reach the docking bay before being recaptured. In space. In a modified maintenance suit. Alone. She had asked him afterward what his plan had been, if he'd gotten to the docking bay. He'd looked at her with those calm, unremarkable eyes and said, "Get a ship." And then, she'd asked. "Go somewhere useful," he'd said. She had written that in her report with slightly unsteady hands. "Marcus," she said now, watching him move through his exercises, "there's been a development." He paused. Just slightly. Just a breath's worth of pause. But she caught it. "Tell me," he said. She had not been authorized to tell him anything yet. The council had said brief Sigma 11, she was Sigma 11's lead researcher and she had been briefed. What she did with that briefing was, technically, her professional discretion. She told him. She told him about the message. About Governor Linda Marsh. About the 12,000 humans in the shelters. About the Vreth fleet. About the council's decision not to send him, and about the 32 days until the 3rd combined fleet could arrive. She told him all of it and she watched him the whole time. He did not stop his exercises while she talked. He moved through them with the same slow, deliberate precision. But something happened to the quality of his attention. It sharpened. It was hard to explain, he didn't move differently, didn't look differently. But the room felt different. The way a room feels different when a fire that has been burning low suddenly gets more air. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. 12,000, he said. Yes. Children. The message specified, yes. Families. It's a civilian colony. Another pause. And the council said no, he said. Not a question. Ambassador Valoran declined to authorize your deployment. He resumed his exercises. HFY, he said quietly. It was a phrase she had heard him use before, in a language she couldn't identify. She had run it through every translation database the cooperative maintained and come up empty. She had asked him about it once. He'd smiled, a small private smile, and said, "It means something my grandmother used to say. Roughly, from this point it's up to me." She watched him for a long moment. "Marcus," she said. "What are you thinking?" He looked up at the camera, directly at it, which he almost never did. His eyes were very calm. "I'm thinking," he said, "about the fact that the service corridor behind the eastern wall of this block was last inspected 14 months ago. And that the atmospheric regulation system in this section runs a diagnostic cycle at 0400 hours that pulls power from the secondary locking grid for approximately 11 seconds. Dr. Vell stared at him. "I'm also thinking," he continued pleasantly, "that there's a light transport vessel in docking bay 3 that hasn't been properly registered in the outpost manifest since it was brought in for maintenance 6 weeks ago. Which means it technically doesn't exist in the security system." She felt the blood drain from her face. "Marcus. And I'm thinking," he said, "that you've been visiting me every morning for 3 years and you've never once worn your hair differently. But this morning your hair is down. Which means you got the briefing, got on the transport to come here, and didn't have time to do your hair the way you normally do." He paused. "Which means you came here first thing. Before reporting to anyone else." She said nothing. "Which means," he said quietly, "that you came to tell me. Before anyone told you to." The silence between them was long and careful. "You have 11 seconds, she said finally. Her voice was very quiet. "During the 0400 diagnostic cycle. That's not much time." "It's plenty," he said. She stood up. "The transport in Bay 3 has a 3-day fuel load," she said, looking at the wall, not at the camera, not at him, just at the wall. "Sector 7 is 4 days out at standard speed. But the transport has a military-grade booster that the maintenance team installed and then forgot to log." She picked up her data pad. "I need to go file my briefing report," she said. It's going to take me about 40 minutes to write it, which is unusual. I normally write reports very quickly. She walked to the door. Marcus, she said without turning around. Yeah. Whatever needs doing, she said. She left. At 0400 hours, the diagnostic cycle pulled power from the secondary locking grid. At 0411 hours, an alarm sounded in Block 7. By 0419 hours, 40 security personnel were conducting a sweep of the outpost. At 0423 hours, someone noticed that the light transport in Docking Bay 3 was gone. At 0424 hours, someone noticed that the transport was not in the outpost manifest. At 0425 hours, Dr. Nara Vel submitted her briefing report to the Council, which noted that Sigma-11 had experienced a security incident and that research subject Caro had successfully completed his 12th escape attempt. She appended a personal note at the bottom of the report. It read, "Transit time to Sector 7, approximately 4 days. I suggest the Council prepare for what happens when he gets there. In my professional assessment, and I have spent 3 years assessing Marcus Cole, the Vreth are not prepared for what is coming. I'm not sure any of us are. But the humans in those shelters might live because of it. That has to count for something." She submitted the report. Then she went and made herself a cup of tea with slightly unsteady hands, sat down at her desk and waited. The transport was a Corvani-class light runner, squat, functional, and designed for exactly the kind of unglamorous deep space transit that nobody wrote stories about. It smelled faintly of machine oil and the particular synthetic protein that Corvani maintenance crews ate in large quantities. The cockpit was sized for a species whose average height was 4.5 feet, which meant Marcus Cole spent the first hour of flight making ergonomic adjustments with the focused patience of a man who had learned not to waste energy on frustration. He reprogrammed the navigation system first. Then he ran a full diagnostic on the military booster, the unlisted one, tucked behind the primary drive in a housing that was clearly a post-manufacture edition and clearly not covered by any maintenance warranty. It was old technology by cooperative standards. By human standards it was exactly what he needed: fast, reliable, and deniable. He set course for Sector 7. Then he sat back and thought. 4 days was a long time to think, and Marcus Cole had always been good at thinking. It was, perhaps, the skill that people least expected when they looked at him. They expected, because of the file, because of the footage, because of the forensic report with the 40 pages and the appended personal note, they expected something that operated on brute force and aggression. Something that solved problems through overwhelming application of violence. That wasn't wrong exactly. But it was incomplete. He had been a special operations soldier for 14 years before the cooperative found him. In those 14 years he had learned that violence was a tool, a specific limited tool with specific limited applications. A hammer. Useful when you needed a hammer. Not useful when you needed a screwdriver or a knife or a spoon or a very careful pair of hands. What he was actually good at, what he had always been good at since before the military, since before any of the training and the shaping and the years of learning to use himself like a weapon, was assessment. He looked at things. He figured out what was actually happening, underneath the thing that appeared to be happening. And then he figured out the minimum effective action required to change the thing that was actually happening. The Vreth. He pulled up everything in the transport's database on the Vreth. It wasn't much. The cooperative's public records were extensive on Pelorian casualties and minimal on Vreth biology and tactics. He supplemented it with his own memory of the incident 7 years ago, the one the forensic report had spent 40 pages trying to explain. He had not been in Sector 6 7 years ago by accident. He had been tracking a Vreth scout unit for 3 weeks before the encounter. He had spent those 3 weeks learning everything he could observe about how they moved, how they communicated, how they organized themselves, and what they were afraid of. What he had learned was interesting. The Vreth were extraordinarily capable in their designated function, bioharvesting. They were large, well-armored by nature, coordinated in the specific, efficient way of highly evolved predators. They operated in units of 4, always 4, with each unit having a designated function within the group. 1 navigator, 1 processor, 1 hunter, 1 coordinator. They had never, in 40 years of documented cooperative contact, encountered meaningful individual resistance. Their entire tactical doctrine was built around the assumption that they would be opposed by frightened, disorganized civilians or, occasionally, by organized military units that they outpowered through sheer tonnage and coordination. They had never encountered anyone who knew their doctrine and had deliberately learned how to break it. He thought about Governor Linda Marsh's voice. The way it cracked on the word please. He thought about 12,000 people in underground shelters, listening to the sounds above them and trying not to let their children hear how scared they were. He thought about Caro, the word he had picked up from an old woman on the third planet he'd ever visited off Earth, a Ithran scholar who had been studying human languages with scholarly delight and had asked him, in their third conversation, if he had a word for the feeling of deciding that something had gone on long enough and it was time to end it. He had thought about it. Caro, she had said, teaching it to him. An old Ithran. It means to see clearly what needs to be done and to stop waiting for someone else to do it. He had liked that word. He used it now, in the quiet of the cockpit, as Sector 7 grew slowly larger in the navigation display. Caro. He had 4 days. He used them well. He slept in 3-hour intervals, maintaining the cycle his body had been trained to operate on. Sleep enough to stay sharp, not enough to lose the particular edge that deep rest sometimes blurred. In between sleep cycles he worked. He pulled every piece of data in the transport system about Vega 7, the colony's geography, its underground tunnel network, its power systems, its population distribution. He mapped the Vreth fleet's last known position from the distress beacon's timestamp and calculated their likely landing pattern based on cooperative records of previous Vreth harvesting operations. He studied the colony's listed resources, not the military resources which were essentially non-existent, but everything. Food production facilities, mining equipment, atmospheric processing systems, medical bay inventory. The colony's own records noted that they had significant reserves of a heavy industrial explosive called Thermite-9, used for mining operations in the rocky substrate beneath the colony. He noted this. He noted everything. On the second day he recorded a message and sent it on an encrypted frequency toward Sector 7. Not to the Cooperative. Not to the Council. To the colony's emergency communication system. The message was addressed to Governor Linda Marsh. It was short. It said, "Governor, my name is Marcus Cole. I am coming to help. I will arrive in approximately 2 days. Please do not announce my arrival on any open channel. Please do not change your colony's behavior pattern in any observable way. Please gather your 4 most trusted people and be ready to meet with me privately within 1 hour of my arrival. Tell them nothing beforehand. I know that's a strange request. I know you have no reason to trust a stranger on a radio. But I am asking anyway. Stay quiet, stay steady, and let your people keep doing what they're doing. Tell them help is coming. Tell them it's going to be okay. Because it is. I'll explain when I get there. Cole out." He sent it. Then he went back to planning. On the 3rd day he hit the edge of Sector 7 and saw the Vreth fleet on his long-range sensors. 17 ships. They were enormous, each one a dark, organic-looking mass of biomechanical engineering that the Vreth had developed over centuries. Not built so much as grown. Shape. The result of a species that had, at some point in their history, chosen to merge technology and biology into a single seamless doctrine. They were positioned in a wide umbrella pattern over Vega 7. 5 ships in high orbit, maintaining sensor and communication blockade. 8 ships in low orbit, running continuous ground scanning operations. 4 ships had actually landed, huge dark masses settled on the surface of the colony like massive predatory creatures crouching over their prey. 12,000 humans below them. Marcus Cole looked at the fleet for a long time. He took a slow breath. "Okay," he said quietly to nobody. To himself. To the empty cockpit. To whatever part of himself he was consulting when he needed to be absolutely sure. "Okay," he said again. And he began his approach. He didn't head for the obvious insertion point, the direct transit corridor that a normal ship would use. Instead he took the transport on a long, quiet arc around the outer edge of the fleet, running dark, using the fleet's own sensor interference pattern against itself. The Vreth's sensors were designed to catch large things: ships, military platforms, orbital batteries. They were not designed to catch one small, power-silent transport drifting on a ballistic arc through their blind spot. He had read their sensor doctrine in the cooperative files. He slipped through. He brought the transport down in a dry riverbed 12 kilometers from the colony's main entrance, far enough to avoid the Vreth ground patrol's regular sweep pattern, close enough to reach on foot in 2 hours. He left the transport. He covered it with the riverbed's natural sediment as best he could in 40 minutes of quiet work. He packed what he needed from the transport's emergency supplies. Then he started walking. The tunnels beneath Vega 7 were not designed for combat. They were designed for the specific, practical purpose of keeping 12,000 colonists alive in a hostile planetary environment, connecting living quarters to the agricultural bays, the water processing units, the atmospheric generators, the medical facilities. The walls were stamped steel and compressed polymer. The lighting was standard utility fluorescent, running on the colony's underground power grid. They smelled of recycled air and anxiety. Governor Linda Marsh was waiting for him at the secondary access point, a service hatch 2 kilometers from the main colony hub, accessible through a crawlway that a full-grown adult could navigate only on hands and knees. Marcus Cole came through the crawlway and found himself in a small equipment room, face to face with 5 people. Linda Marsh was exactly what her voice had suggested. A woman in her mid-50s who had been carrying something very heavy for 11 days and had not put it down once. She was wearing a colony administrator's uniform that had not been changed in what his eyes told him was at least 36 hours. Her eyes were clear and steady in the way that only happens with people who have gotten past the panic and are now operating on pure determination. Behind her were 4 people. He assessed them in 4 seconds. A man in his 30s with engineering insignia, calm, practical, watching Marcus's hands. A woman in her 40s in medical scrubs, alert, direct. A young man maybe 25 who was clearly security, tense but controlled. And an older man in civilian clothes who had the particular posture of someone who had been in a military before he'd been in a colony, relaxed in the shoulders in a way that only people who had spent a long time expecting to need to move fast ever were. 5 people. 5 good choices. Cole, said Governor Marsh. She didn't offer her hand, just looked at him with those clear, tired eyes. You're human. Yes, he said. The cooperative sent 1 human. The cooperative didn't send me, he said. I came. A beat. On your own. Yes. She studied him for a moment. You look like someone who fixes things. I try to, he said. She nodded once, a decisive, done processing nod. What do you need to know? He liked her immediately. Everything, he said. Starting with exact Vreth ground positions, your tunnel map, your available materials inventory, and how many of your 12,000 people have any combat experience at all. She pulled out a data pad. Vreth ground positions, 4 landing sites, approximately 40 to 60 troops per site, total estimated 220 ground forces. They haven't entered the tunnels yet. They've been drilling. She said the word with a flatness that was worse than emotion. They have biodrill equipment. They're boring entry points. Our analysis suggests they'll break through to the tunnel network in approximately 4 to 5 days. 4 to 5 days, he repeated. We've been trying to collapse the tunnel sections nearest the drill points, but we don't have enough controlled demolition to. You have thermite 9, he said. Mining reserves. She blinked. You read our records. Yes. How much? 4 tons. Maybe a little more. He was quiet for 2 seconds. That's enough, he said. Enough for what? Asked the engineer with the calm eyes. Marcus looked at him. Enough to make the next 4 days very unpleasant for 220 Vreth ground troops and to give me time to work on the fleet problem. The young security officer spoke for the first time. What's the fleet problem? 17 ships, said Marcus. The ground troops are bad. The fleet is the actual problem. If the fleet is in orbit, even if we break every ground unit, they can land replacements. They can reinforce. They can glass the surface and go in after your tunnels from above. He paused. We need to take the fleet out of the equation. Silence. You have 1 transport and a data pad, said the security officer carefully. I also have 4 days and 4 tons of thermite 9, said Marcus. He looked at the older man in the civilian clothes, the one with the relaxed shoulders. What's your background? The old man met his eyes. 15 years in Earth military. Infantry. Retired before coming out here. Good, said Marcus. What's your name? Ray, said the old man. Ray Kowalski. Ray, said Marcus. I need you to help me train people. I'm going to show you what to do and you're going to spread it as fast as you can. We're not building an army. We're building something more useful than an army. We're building a 12,000-person problem for the Vreth that they have no tactical doctrine to handle. Ray Kowalski looked at him for a long moment. His expression shifted, not to confidence exactly but to something adjacent to it. Recognition maybe. The recognition of one person who has been in very bad places and come out of them looking at another person who has clearly done the same. All right, said Ray. Show me. For the next 18 hours Marcus Cole did not sleep. He moved through the tunnels with Governor Marsh's engineer, a man named David Park, and mapped every access point, every junction, every utility corridor. He identified choke points. He identified positions of advantage. He identified the 6 most likely tunnel sections that the Vreth drill teams were targeting, based on the vibration patterns that the colony's own seismic monitors had been recording. He went to the mining storage facility and looked at the thermite 9. He looked at it for a long time. Then he called David Park over and they had a 2-hour technical conversation that started with the basics of directed explosive placement and ended somewhere very different. Somewhere that required David Park to sit down for a moment and look at the ceiling. "That would work," David said finally. "Yes," said Marcus. That's a lot," said David. "I know. People are going to have to be very close to the drill points when it goes off," said David. "No," said Marcus. "I'm going to be close to the drill points. Everyone else is going to be exactly where I tell them to be." David Park looked at him. "You're serious," he said. "Yes." "You're going to, alone?" "David," said Marcus. "I need you to trust me and keep working. Can you do that?" Pause. "Yes," said David Park. "Good," said Marcus. "Let's talk about the secondary trigger system." Meanwhile, in a different section of the tunnels, Ray Kowalski was doing something remarkable. He was teaching. He was teaching 12,000 frightened, exhausted, civilian colonists, farmers and engineers and doctors and teachers and parents holding children's hands, how to become, not soldiers but something specific. Something that Marcus had described to Ray in 40 minutes of concise, precise instruction before sending him to work. He was teaching them to be a network. Every person had a role. Not a fighting role, Marcus had been clear about that. Information, communication, movement, misdirection. Creating patterns that the Vreth, scanning from above, would interpret as panic and disorder when they were actually something organized. Making noise in one section to draw attention from another. Moving in groups to create thermal and motion signatures that would cluster the Vreth ground scanning reads in the wrong places. It was not an army. It was something more complicated and more interesting. It was 12,000 people who had stopped being victims and started being participants. Governor Marsh walked the tunnels and watched her people and felt something shift in her chest. Something that had been clenched for 11 days beginning very slightly to loosen. She found Marcus in a maintenance junction at hour 20, crouched over a layout of the tunnel network with a grease pencil and a level of focused intensity that made her stop in the doorway and just watch for a moment. "When did you last eat?" she asked. "This morning," he said without looking up. "It's evening," she said. He made a mark on the layout. She sat down across from him and set a food container between them. He ate without looking at it, continuing to work, and she sat and watched him work and thought about the message she had sent. The one that had gone out into the dark on a prayer that someone would hear it, and thought about the fact that this was who had answered. One man. Who came by himself. Who ate without looking at the food because he was too busy thinking about how to save 12,000 people to pay attention to being hungry. "Why?" she asked. He looked up. "Why what?" he said. "Why are you here? The cooperative didn't send you. You escaped from them to come here. You could have gone anywhere. You could have," she paused. "You could have just been free." He looked at her for a moment. "There were 12,000 people in shelters," he said. "What else would I do?" She looked at him. He went back to his layout. She watched him work and thought that maybe the cooperative was wrong. Not wrong to be careful with him, not wrong to note his capabilities with wide nervous eyes, but wrong about what he was. They had looked at the forensic report and the escape attempts and the calm, unremarkable eyes and seen a monster. She looked at a man who had escaped from a box to come to a place where nobody had asked him to go, to do something that nobody had expected him to do, for people he had never met. She wasn't sure what that was. But it wasn't a monster. A SYMGHY, she thought, not knowing the words, not knowing the language, but feeling the shape of the thing. "From this point it's up to me." At 0200 hours on the first night, the Vreth drills reached the tunnel wall. Not through it, not yet. But close. The vibration in the walls became something the colonists could feel in their teeth, a low, steady grinding that crept through the steel and the polymer and the rock and settled in everyone's chest like a second heartbeat. Marcus was already in position. He had been in position for 4 hours. The eastern drill site, the one with the fastest approach rate, the one that would break through first, was in tunnel section E7, a service corridor that connected the atmospheric processing units to the lower agricultural bays. The corridor was 200 meters long, 3 meters wide, and 2 meters tall. Standard utility construction. Nothing special. Except that Marcus had spent 18 hours making it very special. He was crouched in a maintenance alcove 40 meters from the drill site, in the dark, listening to the grinding with the focused patience of someone who had spent a significant portion of his professional career waiting in dark, uncomfortable places for exactly the right moment. He had a communicator, modified from colony parts, frequency hopping so the Vreth couldn't lock on it. He had 3 remote trigger devices, each with a backup trigger. He had what he needed. He waited. At 0347 hours the wall broke. It happened in stages, first a crack, fine as a hair, spreading across the stamped steel. Then a second crack. Then the sound of the drill changing pitch as it hit the final layer. Then a sound like the whole wall exhaling, a deep tectonic sigh, and then the wall came in. The Vreth came through it. Marcus had read everything the cooperative had on Vreth bioharvesters. The reality of them at close range in poor light coming through a wall was something the files had not fully prepared him for. They were large, close to 3 meters tall, built on a heavily armored bipedal chassis covered in a natural exoskeleton that the cooperative's records rated as equivalent to military-grade plating. They moved with the smooth, flowing efficiency of creatures who had never in their evolutionary history needed to worry much about what they were walking toward. 4 of them. A standard unit. They came through the wall in single file, moving quickly, and deployed into the corridor with the practiced ease of a drill. Navigator in front. Processor behind. Hunter to the left. Coordinator to the right. Standard Vreth insertion pattern. Marcus pressed the first trigger. The Thermite 9 in the wall section behind the Vreth unit, placed carefully over the previous 12 hours in a configuration that David Park had helped him engineer, detonated. Not in an explosion. Not in the conventional sense. Thermite 9, properly directed, did not so much explode as it intensely, precisely, extremely rapidly melted everything in its designated target zone. The section of tunnel behind the Vreth insertion point became, for approximately 4 seconds, an environment of such extreme localized temperature that the Vreth biodrill and the tunnel entrance it had created ceased to exist as functional things. The insertion point was gone. The Vreth unit was now in the tunnel with no way back. Marcus watched them process this on his sensor feed, 4 creatures each the size of a small vehicle, suddenly aware that their retreat route had been eliminated. The coordinator sent a signal, he could see it on the communication monitor, a rapid burst frequency. The signal hit the section of tunnel he had rerouted. It bounced. It went nowhere. They were isolated. Marcus stepped out of the maintenance alcove. He was calm. He had planned this in detail, not just the explosive placement, not just the signal disruption. He had planned the specific sequence of the next 4 minutes. He had planned where each Vreth unit member would be and what they would be doing at each moment, based on their tactical doctrine and the specific environmental configuration of the corridor. He had planned it like an equation. He had planned it like a machine. And he had planned it knowing something about the Vreth that the cooperative's files had mentioned only in passing, something that the xenobiologists had noted as a biological curiosity and then moved on from, apparently not recognizing its tactical significance. The Vreth, like all creatures that had evolved as apex predators in a specific environment, had a blind spot. They expected resistance to come from things that were large. They expected it to come from things that were obvious. They expected it to come from things that behaved the way prey behaved, which was to say they expected it to try to run or try to hide or try to call for help. They did not expect it to walk toward them. He walked toward them. What happened in the next 4 minutes would not go in this story in detail. Not because it wasn't important, but because some things that are real and necessary are not the same as things that are comfortable. What matters is the result. At 0351 hours, the Vreth unit in tunnel section E7 was no longer a functioning unit. Marcus stood in the corridor and breathed. He pressed the communicator. Section E7 clear, he said. In the monitoring room 2 kilometers away, Governor Linda Marsh and David Park and Ray Kowalski heard this and looked at each other. All 4, said Ray. All 4, said Marcus. Ray Kowalski had spent 15 years in Earth military. He had seen a lot. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Right, he said. There are 3 other drill sites, said Marcus. I need 2 more hours before the next one breaks through. Can your teams hold the pattern? Yes, said Ray. Good. Call out. The communicator clicked off. Governor Marsh looked at the tunnel layout on the display, the 4 drill sites, the careful web of prepared positions, the 12,000 people moving through the network in the patterns Ray had taught them. He's going to do all 4, she said. Yes, said Ray. Alone. Ray looked at the display. He's not operating alone, he said. He's operating with 12,000 people. He just happens to be the only one at the sharp end. She thought about that. She thought about the cooperative council chambers somewhere out in the dark, where 14 ambassadors had looked at a file and decided that this was a monster and a risk and not something they were willing to use. She thought about 12,000 people in shelters who were alive right now. She pressed the communicator. Marcus, she said. Pause. Yeah, he said. Thank you, she said. A longer pause. I haven't done anything yet, he said. Yes you have, she said. The communicator clicked off. He took the second drill site at 0600 hours. It was harder. The Vreth at the second site had heard the loss of communication from the first unit and had adjusted. They came through faster, more cautiously, in a modified pattern that had the coordinator hanging back at the insertion point to maintain the signal link with the ships above. Smart. Adaptive. He had expected adaptation. He had planned for it. The second engagement took 7 minutes instead of 4. Afterward, he sat in a utility access corridor for 11 minutes and breathed carefully through his nose and let his body do the things it knew how to do when it had been pushed past certain limits. The recalibration, the controlled processing, the deliberate settling of physiological systems that had been operating at extremes. He had learned to do this efficiently, the way he had learned to do most things efficiently. Not without cost but without waste. Then he got up and went to the third drill site. The third site was the largest. The Vreth had been drilling here with 3 units, not 1, anticipating that this tunnel section was a major artery of the colony's underground network. They were right. They had also been drilling at 3 separate points, creating a triangulated insertion that was designed to close off retreat and coverage options. Good tactics. He had prepared for it differently. He didn't fight them at the insertion points. He let them come through. All 3 units. And then he used the Thermite 9 placement that he and David had spent the most time on. A configuration that David had needed to sit down after Marcus described, and that had required 8 separate stage placements at precise intervals through the tunnel walls. When it went off, the effect was not an explosion. It was something more like a cascade, a series of controlled structural changes to the tunnel geometry that, over approximately 90 seconds, transformed the section of tunnel the 3 Vreth units had entered into something that was no longer the kind of space that a large, coordinated 4-unit tactical group could easily function in. It was, by the time the cascade finished, a space that was extremely difficult to navigate if you were large and armored and accustomed to having room to coordinate and deploy. It was very easy to navigate if you were one human who had memorized every centimeter of it. He was in and out of that section in 9 minutes. When he pressed the communicator afterward, he just said, 3 clear. Governor Marsh heard it and had to take a moment before she could respond. 4, she said. For tonight, he said. Get everyone moved to the deeper shelters. The pattern ray set up, level C formation. Get them there and keep them there. I need the upper tunnels as clear as possible. Done, she said. Marcus. I know, he said. You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to ask if I'm okay, he said. Pause. Are you, she said. The line was quiet for a moment. Working on it, he said. The 4th site, he took it at 0100 hours just past midnight of the second day. 1 unit. Standard insertion. He was tired in a way that was not about sleep or food but about accumulated physical demand. The kind of tired that the body speaks very directly about and that the mind has to answer with equal directness. He answered it. The 4th unit was done in 5 minutes. He sat against the wall of tunnel section W3 in the dark for a while after. He thought about the fleet. 17 ships up there, running their scanner arrays, waiting for their ground teams to report back with harvest data. 17 ships whose ground teams were now entirely silent. He thought about what the Vreth Fleet Command would be doing right now. Processing the loss of communication. Running analysis. Deciding what it meant. He thought about what he would do next. And slowly, in the dark, in the quiet of the tunnels with 12,000 people breathing somewhere in the rock around him, he began to smile. Not a pleasant smile exactly. The smile of someone who has figured out the next piece. He pressed the communicator. Governor Marsh, he said. Her voice came back immediately, she had not been sleeping. I'm here. I need to talk to your medical officer, he said. And David Park. And I need access to your colony's atmospheric processing systems. And I need to know everything you have on Vreth biochemistry. Pause. Vreth biochemistry, she repeated. Yes. Another pause. I'll get you Dr. Chin, she said. The Cooperative Council received its second briefing update from Dr. Nara Vel at hour 72. The first update had been a calm, clinical report of Marcus Cole's escape. The second was somewhat different in tone. Ambassador Veloran read it at his desk at 0600 hours, cup of warm Ithran herb tea going cold at his elbow, and his expression changed approximately 17 times in the 4 minutes it took him to read. The update noted the following. All 4 Vreth drill sites at Vega, 7 had gone silent. Vreth Fleet Command had responded by sending 6 additional ground units, standard reinforcement protocol. All 6 had entered the tunnels and not emerged. Vreth Fleet Command had then suspended ground operations and was conducting orbital analysis. The update noted that the colony's 12,000 residents were all alive, accounted for, and, this was the part that Ambassador Valoran read twice, organized. Not panicking. Organized. The update noted that Marcus Cole had, according to colony communication intercepts, been awake for approximately 62 hours and was currently in a meeting with the colony's medical officer and chief engineer. The update noted that the Cooperative's Sector 6 monitoring station had detected, approximately 40 hours ago, a light transport vessel departing Research Outpost Sigma 11 on an unlisted departure record, and that said vessel had subsequently been tracked on a trajectory toward Sector 7, and that Dr. Vell's personal assessment was that the Council should probably start thinking about what they were going to say to the Vreth Fleet Command when this was over. Ambassador Valoran set down the update. He picked up his cold tea. He sat very still for a long time. Commander Death appeared in his doorway. "You read it," said Death. "I read it," said Valoran. "He took out 10 Vreth units," said Death. "That's 40 individuals. Elite-class bioharvesters." "I am aware of what the numbers represent," said Valoran. "The fleet hasn't pulled out," said Death. "They've suspended ground operations, but 17 ships are still in orbit." "What is he planning?" said Valoran. Not really asking Death. More asking the universe. "I don't know," said Death. "But he asked for Vreth biochemistry data." He paused. "I sent what we had." Valoran looked up sharply. "You sent?" "He's trying to save 12,000 people," said Death. "I sent what we had." Valoran looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his communicator. "Get me Ambassador Gresh," he said. "And Ambassador Lyrine. And tell the rest of the Council we're reconvening in 1 hour." "What are you going to tell them?" said Death. "I'm going to tell them," said Valoran carefully, "that we made a mistake. And that we are going to spend the next several days deciding how to live with it, and what we are going to do when this is over." Dr. Sarah Chen had been the colony's chief medical officer for 6 years. She had handled broken bones and equipment accidents and the particular stress-related illness that frontier colonists developed at specific rates in specific seasonal cycles. She had delivered 17 babies in the Vega 7 medical bay. She had dealt with a mine collapse 3 years ago that had sent 12 injured workers through her doors in 4 hours. She had not, until now, sat across a table from a man who was covered in evidence of what the last 3 days had done and was calmly asking her about Vreth biochemistry. "The exoskeleton," said Marcus. He had a colony data pad and was making notes. "The cooperative records say it's a grown structure, organic like a shell. What does it do chemically? What does it process?" Sarah pulled up her own data. She had asked for everything the colony's medical database had, and it wasn't much, but it was something. "The exoskeleton is partly respiratory," she said. "The Vreth breathe through it. There are micropore structures distributed across the surface. Oxygen uptake, carbon dioxide release. The pores are extremely fine. They filter out most particles above 200 nanometers. "Most particles," said Marcus. "Most," said Sarah. "The filtration isn't perfect. Microparticles in the range of 100 to 150 nanometers can pass through." Marcus was very still. "And if microparticles in that range, the right kind of microparticles, were present in the atmosphere that the Vreth were breathing?" Sarah looked at him. "What kind of microparticles are you thinking about?" He told her. She stared at him. "That's," she started. "Possible," he said. "Theoretically," she said slowly. "Theoretically, yes. If you had the right base compound, and if you could get it into an aerosol suspension at the right particle size, and if the Vreth were in an enclosed or semi-enclosed environment where they couldn't simply move away from the affected zone." "The tunnel network," he said. "The tunnel network," she repeated. "But the Vreth have suspended ground operations. They're not sending anyone into the tunnels." "Not yet," he said. She looked at him. "You're going to make them," she said. "Not a question." "Yes," he said. "How?" He smiled, that same private, not quite pleasant smile. "I'm going to give them a reason they can't refuse," he said. "Something they want more than they want to be careful." "What's that?" "Me," he said simply. She stared at him. "You're going to use yourself as bait," she said. "I prefer tactical asset," he said. "But yes." She sat back. She was a doctor. She had a doctor's relationship with the idea of using a human body as a trap mechanism for 200 Vreth bioharvesters. It was not, by any clinical metric, a relationship she was comfortable with. "And what happens to you during this plan?" she asked. He met her eyes. He didn't answer for a moment. Marcus, she said. I'm going to need to be very fast, he said. And I'm going to need the compound ready. And I need David to have the atmospheric system modifications done in the next 8 hours. He paused. And I need you to trust me. She looked at him for a long time. Doctor's eyes. The eyes of someone who had learned to assess people honestly. I trust you, she said. I just also want to know your actual survival assessment. He looked at her. Positive, he said. Percentage. Pause. Positive, he said again. She decided not to push. Over the next 8 hours, the colony of Vega 7 became, under the direction of 3 sleep-deprived humans running on caffeine and determination, something remarkable. David Park and a team of 12 colony engineers modified the atmospheric processing system in 6 tunnel sections, not to change the breathable air mixture, but to introduce a secondary injection capability. Inputs that could, on command, aerosolize a specific compound through the tunnel ventilation network and distribute it to 6 designated sections simultaneously. Sarah Chin synthesized the compound. She worked from the colony's chemical stores and the medical bay's equipment and Marcus's specifications, which he had spent 4 hours working out from first principles using the cooperative's Vreth biochemistry data and things he had observed himself, 7 years ago, that had not made it into any report. The compound was, at the particle sizes Sarah achieved, effectively invisible. It dispersed evenly. It was stable in atmospheric conditions for approximately 6 hours. And it was, for a creature breathing through micropore structures in its exoskeleton at a continuous rate, acutely unpleasant in a way that the clinical term disabling only partially captured. Governor Marsh coordinated the movement of the colony's 12,000 residents to the deepest, most protected shelter sections, level D, as far from the target tunnel sections as the network extended. She did this calmly, explaining what was happening to her people in terms that were honest without being terrifying, and she watched them move with the organized steadiness that race training had built into them over 4 days, and she thought about what it meant that a group of civilians had become this so fast because one man had shown up and shown them how. At 1800 hours, Marcus called a final briefing with the core team. Governor Marsh, David, Sarah, and Ray's best 6 people from the security unit, the ones he trusted to follow extremely specific instructions in extremely high-pressure circumstances without improvising. Marcus laid out the plan. When he finished, there was a silence. Then Ray said, "You're going to go up to the surface." "Yes," said Marcus. "And make yourself visible to the fleet." "Yes." "So they'll send down another ground force." "Yes." "A big one." "As big as they have left," said Marcus. "Which is, based on the deployment pattern and my count of what's gone already, approximately 140 individuals. 7 units of 20. And you're going to lead them into the tunnel network," said Ray. "Yes." "And then David triggers the atmospheric system." "Yes." "And then," Ray stopped. "And then the tunnel network becomes very effectively hostile to Vreth biology," said Marcus. "And very navigable by one human who knows the layout and isn't breathing through an exoskeleton." Ray looked at him. "The ships," said Ray. "The 17 ships are still up there. Even if you take out every ground force they have, the ships are still up there." "Yes," said Marcus. "So what happens with the ships?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Leave the ships to me," he said. Ray stared at him. "Marcus," said Governor Marsh carefully, "what exactly are you planning to do about 17 Vreth warships?" He looked at her. "Something that the cooperative is going to have very strong feelings about," he said. "And something that I think after tonight they'll be very glad I did." He went up at midnight. The surface of Vega 7 at night was cold, the planet had a 40-hour day cycle, and the long nights brought temperatures that the colony's designers had accounted for in their shelter systems but that felt, standing in the open air without environmental suit, like the world's way of communicating that it was not interested in your comfort. He didn't wear a suit. He stood in the open, 200 meters from the nearest Vreth landing site, in a clearing that the scanner arrays could not miss. He waited. He did not have to wait long. The Vreth had been analyzing the silence from their ground teams for 3 days. They had gone from suspicion to certainty that something had happened in the tunnels, something their tactical doctrine had no clear category for. Their bioscanners had been reading the colony's 12,000 humans as a distributed, partially mobile population in the lower tunnel sections. Standard colonist response to threat, shelter in place. Expected. What their scanners had not been reading was one human standing in the open. Because one human was too small normally to register as significant. Except that the Vreth Fleet Command had been receiving reports for 3 days about missing units and silent ground teams, and now there was one human standing in the open 200 meters from their landing site. The signal the fleet command sent down to the landing site was rapid and emphatic. The response from the landing site was movement. A lot of movement. Marcus watched them come. He counted. 7 units. 20 individuals each. Exactly as predicted. 140 Vreth bioharvesters, moving with the fast, coordinated efficiency of the best predatory ground force the Outer Rim had produced in recorded history, coming toward one human standing in a clearing. He waited until he could see them clearly, until the lead unit was close enough that there was no possibility of him miscounting, no possibility that some had hung back, no possibility that this wasn't the full available force. Then he turned and walked toward the tunnel entrance. He did not run. He walked. This was deliberate. A running human was a fleeing human. A fleeing human activated pursuit instincts and pursuit doctrine. The Vreth would scatter, spread, try to cut off escape routes. A walking human was something different. A walking human, in the context of 3 days of missing units and unexplained silence, communicated something that activated a different set of responses in a predatory intelligence. It communicated, "I'm not afraid of you." It communicated, "Come in here." It communicated, "I want you to follow me." They followed him. He went into the tunnels. He moved fast now, not panicked fast but purposeful fast, the efficient ground-eating pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going and exactly how long they had to get there. He moved through the tunnel network on the path he had memorized over 4 days, taking the specific route that would pull the Vreth pursuit through all 6 of the target sections. He pressed the communicator once. "David," he said. 3 minutes. "Understood," said David Park. He counted his seconds. He heard the Vreth behind him, the sound of 140 large armored bodies moving through steel and polymer tunnels, the crash and boom of them, the subvocal coordination signals they used to maintain unit cohesion. They were fast. Faster than the files had suggested, or faster than the files had accurately conveyed. He made a mental note about that for a report he might not get to write. He was through the 6th target section at 2 minutes 40 seconds. He pressed the communicator once. "Now," he said. David Park, in the atmospheric management room 2 kilometers away, activated 6 injection points simultaneously. The compound Sarah had synthesized, stable, invisible, particle size perfect for Vreth exoskeleton pore infiltration, moved through 6 tunnel sections ventilation systems in under 90 seconds. Marcus was at the junction point, the one section of tunnel that he had designed to be outside the injection zones, a specific gap in the coverage that was large enough for one human to stand in and small enough that the atmospheric mixing would keep the compound from reaching him in effective concentration. He stood there. He listened. And he heard the Vreth behind him change. It was not immediate. The compound didn't work instantly, and the Vreth were extraordinarily tough. But the change was unmistakable. The coordinated movement sounds began to fragment. The subvocal signals became irregular, overlapping, then contradictory. Large bodies that had been moving with fluid efficiency began to encounter difficulties. Not collapse, not immediately, but the particular difficulty of creatures whose primary sensory and respiratory system was being progressively compromised by something they could not see, could not identify, and had no tactical doctrine to handle. They were, put simply, becoming very unwell. Marcus moved back through the target sections. He moved efficiently. He moved purposefully. He did what he needed to do. When he pressed the communicator at the end of it, his voice was steady. "Ground force clear," he said. The monitoring room was silent for 3 seconds. Then Ray Kowalski said in a voice that was very controlled and very flat, "All of them?" "All of them," said Marcus. Another silence. "Marcus," said Governor Marsh. "Are you?" "I need the transport," he said. "Tell me it's still in the riverbed." "The scout we sent yesterday confirmed it," she said. "I need to reach it in the next 2 hours," he said. "And I need a Vreth biosignal emitter. The kind their ground teams use to mark harvest complete status." Pause. "We have one," she said carefully. "We recovered it from," she stopped. "From one of the ground team sites," he said. "Yes. I need it." "Marcus." Her voice was very careful now. "What are you going to do with a harvest complete signal?" "I'm going to send it to the fleet," he said. Silence. "And they'll think," she started. "They'll think the harvest is complete and the ground teams are requesting pickup confirmation," he said. "Standard Vreth protocol. The fleet will drop their orbital screens and go to pickup formation." She understood. She understood what he was saying and what he was planning to do and what it meant, and she sat down. "The cooperative is going to have very strong feelings," she said softly. "I know," he said. "The transport you have, it's not a military vessel," she said. "It's a light runner." "I know," he said. "Against 17 Vreth warships," she said. "With the element of surprise," he said, "and the military booster and 4 days of knowing exactly where each ship is positioned, and a very specific target." He had explained to nobody what the specific target was. He hadn't needed to yet. But he said it now to Governor Marsh because he thought she deserved to know. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That would work." "Yes," he said. "If it works," she said. "Yes," he said. "Marcus," she said. "Come back." He was already walking toward the surface. "Working on it," he said. The thing about Vreth fleet architecture that the Cooperative's files mentioned in an appendix, not in the main body, in an appendix on page 212 of a document that was primarily about Vreth biology and secondarily about tactical assessment and only very distantly interested in engineering, was that Vreth ships, like all Vreth technology, were grown rather than built. They were biological structures. Large, dark, extraordinary biological structures that had been shaped by Vreth bioengineers over centuries into their current configuration. They were extraordinarily durable against conventional weapons. The biological matrix absorbed and distributed impact energy in ways that conventional military engineering could not replicate. They were extraordinarily powerful. They were, in short, very difficult to damage. Except, the same biological architecture that made them tough also meant that they had a central biological node, a structure that performed the function in a grown ship that a computer core performed in a built one. Not quite a brain. Not quite a heart. Something in between. A hub. A coordinator. Every Vreth ship had one. And unlike the outer shell, which was centuries of hardened biological matrix, the central node was living, active, unarmored biological tissue. Because it needed to be. Because growing technology required living coordination. Marcus had found this in the appendix. Page 212. He had thought about it for a long time. The transport left the riverbed at 0200 hours, running dark on a ballistic trajectory that kept it below the fleet's standard scan threshold for the first 40 minutes. He had the Vreth Harvest Complete signal ready, a device the size of his fist recovered from one of the ground team sites that he had spent an hour learning to use. He sent the signal at 0247 hours. He watched the fleet's response on his sensors. The response was exactly what Vreth protocol predicted. The 5 high-orbit ships began their transition to pick up formation, dropping their orbital screens, adjusting positioning to create the standard pickup corridor, slaving their scanner arrays to harvest verification mode rather than threat detection mode. The window was approximately 14 minutes. In that 14 minutes, the fleet scanner arrays were looking down at the colony. Not out into space. Not at the perimeter where a small, dark, fast transport on a military booster was coming in hot and low and quiet. Marcus Cole hit the first ship at 0251 hours. He didn't ram it. That was the option the files would have made a reader think of, and it was wrong. Ramming a Vreth ship accomplished nothing useful, as the biological matrix absorbed the impact. He used the transport's docking protocol. He locked onto the ship's biological hull and used the transport's modified docking clamps, the ones he had spent 48 hours adapting in the colony's engineering bay, the ones that David Park had helped him with and then had to sit down after, to create a contact point. Then he went aboard. What he did on the first ship took 11 minutes. He had located the central node from the external biological topology. Each Vreth ship's node created a specific electromagnetic signature that was consistent across all ship classes, because biology, unlike engineering, was conservative. It found what worked and replicated it. He knew what he was looking for. He found it. He did what needed to be done. And then he was back in the transport and moving to the second ship. The Vreth fleet had a response time. The window between the moment an unusual event registered in their systems and the moment they had coordinated an effective response. The Cooperative's files put this at approximately 6 minutes for a first event, reducing with each subsequent event as the fleet command adapted. He had planned his route between ships with this in mind. He worked with the methodical pace of someone who had calculated how much time he had and was spending it precisely. No faster than necessary because fast was sloppy and sloppy was how things went wrong. No slower because the margin was what it was. Ship 2. Ship 3. Ship 4. Ship 5. The high-orbit ships, the ones that had dropped their screens for pickup formation. By the time the Vreth Fleet Command registered that something had gone wrong on Ship 1, Marcus Cole was boarding Ship 3. By the time the Fleet Command had coordinated a fleet-wide alert and the low-orbit ships began to reorganize, he was on Ship 5. The 5 high-orbit ships went dark in sequence. Not destroyed. Disabled. Specifically, precisely, surgically disabled in the one way that a grown biological ship could be disabled, by compromising the central node that coordinated everything else. The Vreth Fleet Command responded to the loss of 5 ships the way any military command responds to sudden catastrophic loss, with a combination of urgency, alarm, and the particular confusion that comes from losing 5 assets in 11 minutes to something you cannot see and cannot categorize. They turned their scanner arrays outward. They found the transport. One small, clearly civilian vessel. The Fleet Command processed this for approximately 30 seconds. Then they sent a communication. Marcus received it in the cockpit of the transport, currently sitting 200 kilometers from Ship 6 in the low-orbit ring, running dark and waiting. The communication was in Vreth, a language that the Cooperative had been translating for 40 years and that Marcus had spent significant time with, because he had always believed in learning the language of things he might need to deal with. The communication said, roughly translated, "Identify yourself. What are you? What did you do to our ships?" He thought about how to answer. Then he pressed the communications panel. He answered in Vreth. His accent was poor and he was aware of it, but the words were right. He said, "I am Marcus Cole. I am from Earth. Your ground forces are gone. 5 of your ships are disabled. I am now preparing to address your remaining 12 ships. I am giving you this communication as a courtesy, because I want you to understand what is happening before it is finished. You came to this place to harvest 12,000 people. Those people are alive. Your people are not. You have approximately 8 minutes before I continue. I suggest you use that time to think about whether it would be more productive to leave than to find out how this ends." He released the communications panel. He waited. The Vreth fleet was silent for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Then 11 of the 12 remaining ships broke orbit. They didn't retreat gracefully. They moved with the urgent, inelegant haste of large things that have decided very suddenly that they want to be somewhere else. Their biodrives lit up and they turned and they ran, on a heading that the navigation system estimated would take them back to the outer rim in approximately 6 weeks. 11 ships. 1 ship remained. Marcus looked at it on the display. The remaining ship was the Fleet Command vessel, the largest of the 17, a different class from the others, the one that had been in high orbit running command and coordination functions while the rest of the fleet operated. It held position. He waited. After 3 minutes it sent a communication. It was not in Vreth. It was in Cooperative Standard, the common language of galactic communication, which meant whoever was sending it had experience with cooperative contact. It said, "You are 1 human." He pressed the panel. "Yes," he said. Pause. "1 human defeated our ground force and disabled 5 warships." "Yes," he said. A longer pause. "Our records do not contain information on humans that..." A pause. "Our records are incomplete." "Yes," he said. The longest pause yet. "We are withdrawing." He said nothing. "This colony is no longer a designated harvest target," said the Vreth command vessel. "Biological harvesting protocols are suspended for this sector until further assessment." He waited. "You said from Earth. There are more humans on Earth." It wasn't a question, but it was also a question. He pressed the communications panel. "Yes," he said simply. "There are a lot of us." Silence. The Vreth command vessel's biodrive lit up. It turned. It ran. Marcus Cole sat in the cockpit of a Corvani-class light transport in the orbit of Vega 7 and watched the last Vreth ship disappear from his sensor display. Then he sat back. He looked at the ceiling of the cockpit for a long moment. Then he pressed the communicator. "Governor Marsh," he said. Her voice came back immediately, tight with the intensity of someone who had been listening to everything and waiting. "I hear you," she said. "They're gone," he said. Silence. Then her voice, cracking slightly the way it had cracked on the word please in the message, except this time on something entirely different. "All of them," she said. "All of them," he said. She made a sound. Not words. Just a sound. The sound of something enormous being released. He heard, in the background through the communicator, other sounds, people being told, voices rising, something that was crying and laughing and shouting all simultaneously in that particular human way that no other species in the Cooperative had quite found a way to replicate. 12,000 people finding out they were alive. He listened to it. He sat in the cockpit and he listened to it and he let it be exactly what it was, enormous, messy, real, and something in his chest that had been held very carefully and very tightly for a very long time did something complicated. He sat with it. He brought the transport down to the surface the next morning. He landed it in the cleared area near the colony's main entrance. Not in the riverbed, not hidden, just landed it in the open in the morning light of Vega 7 and climbed out and stood in the cold air and let the planet do what it was doing, which was existing with the flat, magnificent indifference of all planets to the things that happened on their surfaces. They came out to meet him. Not a delegation. Not a formal reception. Just people, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds, flowing out of the colony entrance in the particular way of people who have been inside a very small space for a very long time and are discovering the outside again. They were all ages. Old people and young people and children, holding their parents' hands and looking at the sky with expressions that mixed residual fear with something that was cautiously, tentatively, beginning to look like wonder. Governor Linda Marsh came through the crowd and walked up to him and stopped 2 meters away and looked at him. He looked at her. She was still wearing the same uniform, still hadn't changed it. There were lines under her eyes that hadn't been there 11 days ago and would probably never fully go away. She had the look of someone who had been through a specific kind of fire, not destroyed by it but changed by it. She offered her hand. He took it. They shook hands the way humans did, a specific gesture that most other cooperative species found baffling or unsanitary but that meant something in the human context that was difficult to translate. Acknowledgement. Recognition. I see what you did. I see what it cost. I'm here. Thank you, she said. You did most of it, he said. Your people. You showed us how, she said. He looked at the crowd. At the old man, Ray Kowalski, standing to one side with his arms crossed and an expression that was somewhere between pride and something quieter. At David Park, who had his arm around a woman who was presumably family, his eyes red-rimmed with what might have been relief and might have been exhaustion and was probably both. At Sarah Chin, who was holding a data pad and looking at him with doctor's eyes. He looked at the children. There were a lot of them. Looking at him with that specific, wide-open quality that children had, no filter, no calculation, just direct and immediate engagement with whatever was in front of them. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, brown hair, missing one front tooth, walked through the crowd and stood in front of him and looked up at him with absolute seriousness. Did you fight the monsters? She said. He crouched down to her level. Yes, he said. Are they gone? Yes, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said with the same absolute seriousness, were you scared? He looked at her. A little, he said honestly. She nodded, satisfied with this answer. My mom says it's okay to be scared, she said. She says brave means doing it even when you're scared. He looked at her. Your mom is right, he said. The girl reached out and very carefully took his hand and held it for a moment, with the complete, uncomplicated gravity of a child giving something important. Then she let go and turned and ran back to find her mother. He stood up. He stood in the morning air of Vega 7 and looked at 12,000 people who were alive and thought about the word Caro. To see clearly what needs to be done and to stop waiting for someone else to do it. The Cooperative Council convened an emergency session at 1,400 hours, Cooperative Standard Time. Ambassador Valoran had not slept in 36 hours. He sat at the head of the council table and he looked at 14 holographic avatars and one live face, Commander Death sitting to his right, and he thought about Dr. Naravel's report, which he had read 4 times. The report detailed what Marcus Cole had done. All of it. In the precise, careful, honest language of a scientist who had made a decision she was prepared to answer for and was now answering for it with complete candor. He had taken out 10 Vreth units in the tunnels. He had led a 140-strong Vreth ground force into a targeted atmospheric trap. He had disabled 5 Vreth warships by boarding them, alone, 1 ship at a time in a civilian transport, and compromising their central biological nodes. He had communicated directly with the Vreth Fleet Command in Vreth, and told them that he was from Earth. And then 11 Vreth warships had run. And then 1 Vreth warships had told the Cooperative that it was suspending bioharvesting protocols for the sector. And then the last Vreth ship had run too. Because of 1 human. With no authorization. With no support. With no weapons beyond what he could carry and what he could plan. Valoran had read the forensic report from 7 years ago. He had read it with an academic's distance back then, something unfortunate that had happened, something worrying, something to be carefully managed. He read it differently now. The question before this council, he said, is what we do next. We should begin with an apology, said Ambassador Lorene immediately. Her crystalline skin was the particular color she made when she had been processing something difficult for a long time and had arrived at a conclusion that was uncomfortable and correct. An apology, repeated Ambassador Siv. To whom? Said Valoran. To Marcus Cole, said Lorene. And, relatedly, to every human in this galaxy. We received a distress call from 12,000 people. We had the means to respond. We chose not to respond because we were afraid. She paused. We locked up the tool instead of using it, and then the tool escaped and used itself, and 12,000 people are alive because of it. We should acknowledge what that means. The council was quiet. He broke every containment protocol, said SIV. He used unauthorized force. He potentially violated 17 treaties with the Vreth by saving 12,000 lives, said Valoran quietly. SIV stopped. The Vreth treaty issues are significant, said Death. The Vreth are technically going to have diplomatic grievances. Though, given that they were in the process of harvesting a registered cooperative colony, I suspect their diplomatic standing is going to be somewhat complicated. He paused. Also, he told the Vreth Fleet Command that there are a lot of humans on Earth. Yes, said Valoran. That was deliberate. It was, said Death. He wanted them to know. He wanted the Vreth to factor in, for the first time, the real number. The actual scale of what humans are. The Council thought about this. 8 billion humans on Earth and more in colonies across the galaxy. 8 billion people like Marcus Cole, not all of them with his specific capabilities but all of them from the same world. All of them from the place that had produced a man who had gone, alone, against 17 Vreth warships and won. The Vreth were going to need to recalculate a great many things. What do we do about Cole himself? Asked SIV. Valoran looked at the table. We offer him a choice, he said. Which is something we should have done from the beginning. He paused. We explain the situation honestly. We explain what we can offer and what we are asking. And we ask him, genuinely ask him, what he wants. And if he wants to leave, said SIV. Then we wish him well, said Valoran. And we spend some serious time thinking about how we treat human beings in this cooperative. He looked around the table. We called him a monster. We put him in a box. We spent 6 years studying him like a specimen. And when 12,000 people needed help, he was the one who went. Without being asked. Without being authorized. Without any promise of reward or recognition. He looked at his hands. I think that says something about what kind of person he actually is, he said. I think it says something about what we missed. And I think it says something about what we owe him, and, frankly, what we owe humanity in general, going forward. The Council voted. The result was 14-0. They were going to do better. The Cooperative's fastest courier vessel reached Vega, 6 days after the Vreth fleet withdrew. It was a small, sleek ship, nothing military, just fast, with a discreet Cooperative diplomatic insignia on its hull. It set down near the colony's main landing pad with the careful, considered precision of a vessel whose pilot had been briefed extensively on the current sensitivity of the situation. Ambassador Valoran himself stepped off. He had never been to a human colony before. He had met humans, Cooperative diplomats, traders, researchers, in the controlled environments of stations and council chambers. But a colony was different. It was the specific, revealing reality of a species in its own space, living its own life on its own terms. Vega 7 was, he had to admit, a good colony. Battered, the evidence of 11 days of Vreth occupation was everywhere in the surface scarring around the drill sites and the general strain visible on every face. But functioning. Organized. Alive. 12,000 people alive. Governor Marsh met him at the landing pad. She had, he noticed, finally changed her uniform. She shook his hand, a human greeting he had researched, wanting to get it right, and looked at him with the clear, level eyes of someone who had run out of patience with diplomatic circumlocution some time ago and was prepared to say so if necessary. Ambassador, she said. Governor Marsh, he said. I owe you and your people an apology that I will give more properly in a formal setting. But first, is he still here? He's been staying in one of the guest quarters since the ships left, she said. He helped us with cleanup and structural assessment. He's good at structural assessment. Valoran suspected that Marcus Cole was good at most things he turned his attention to. I'd like to speak with him, said Valoran. I'll take you, she said. She walked him through the colony, through the tunnels that Marcus Cole had used, past the sealed sections where the Thermite 9 had done its work, past clusters of people who looked at the Ithran ambassador with expressions ranging from curiosity to cool assessment. Several children stared openly. One waved. He waved back a little awkwardly. They found Marcus Cole in an equipment bay, helping a team of colony engineers assess a structural section that had been damaged during the Vreth ground drilling operations. He was doing something with a calibration tool and a data pad, and he didn't look up until they were 3 meters away. Then he looked up. He looked at Valoran. Valoran looked at him. He had read the file so many times he had it essentially memorized. He had looked at surveillance footage, at psychological assessments, at a 40-page forensic report. He had expected. He wasn't sure what he had expected. Something large somehow. Something that announced itself. Marcus Cole was not large. He was a medium-height, dark-haired human with calm eyes and an expression that was neither welcoming nor hostile. Just open in the particular way that people were open when they had decided to wait and see before making judgments. "Ambassador Valoran," he said. "Marcus Cole," said Valoran. They looked at each other. "You came yourself," said Marcus. "Yes," said Valoran. "I thought that was appropriate." Pause. "All right," said Marcus. He set down the calibration tool. "Let's talk." They sat in a small meeting room off the equipment bay, just the two of them at Valoran's request. Governor Marsh was outside, which was also at Valoran's request, though he suspected she could hear most of what was said through the door. Valoran began with the apology. He gave it fully and without qualification. The containment, the refusal to deploy, the 6 years of treating a human being as a specimen rather than a person, the failure to respond to the distress call. He said all of it, looking at Marcus directly, not looking for absolution and not minimizing. Marcus listened without expression. When Valoran finished, there was a silence. "I understand why you were careful," said Marcus finally. "What I can do is genuinely alarming if you're not sure where it's pointed." "Yes," said Valoran. "That's true. But we were not just careful, we were afraid. And we let 12,000 people nearly die because of it." Marcus looked at him. "Nearly," he said. "Yes," said Valoran. "Nearly. Because of you." Another pause. "I have an offer," said Valoran. "From the full council, unanimous." "What kind of offer?" said Marcus. Valoran folded his hands on the table. "We want to formalize what you already are," he said. "Not containment. Not research. A position, with authority, with support, with genuine resources. A role within the cooperative that is honest about what you do and how you do it. You would not be a soldier and you would not be a prisoner. You would be," he paused, choosing the word carefully, "a problem solver. When the galaxy has the kind of problems that require the kind of solutions that you provide." Marcus looked at him for a long time. "I've seen how the cooperative operates," he said. "I've seen 14 ambassadors look at a distress call and spend time voting on whether to respond to it while 12,000 people waited." "Yes," said Valoran. "You have. And I'm not going to defend that. I'm going to say that the council has voted to change how we handle distress calls. The vote was unanimous. It wasn't unanimous because I convinced everyone, it was unanimous because we watched you save 12,000 people, alone, and we had to confront what we had chosen not to do." He paused. "We needed that confrontation. I'm not glad it came at this cost. But it came and we're trying to be honest about what it means." Marcus was quiet. "What does the role look like practically?" he said. Valoran told him. The telling took 20 minutes. It was specific and honest. The authority, the support structure, the reporting requirements, the limitations, the genuine areas of discretion. He did not make it sound better than it was. He had decided, before coming here, that the only offer worth making to Marcus Cole was an honest one. When he finished, Marcus was quiet for a long time. "HFY," he said quietly. Valoran, who had been a diplomat for 30 years and who had studied many languages, looked at him. "What does that mean?" he said. Marcus looked at him. "It means I've been waiting for someone to give me a job," he said. "Not a cage. A job." Valoran felt something in his chest shift. "Will you accept the offer?" he said. Marcus leaned back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling, the same way he had looked at the ceiling of his cell at Sigma 11 on who knew how many nights, through however many escape attempts, through 6 years of being told he was too dangerous to use. "Yes," he said. One word. Valoran exhaled something that had been held for a very long time. "There is one condition," said Marcus. "Name it," said Valoran. "The 12,000 people on this colony," said Marcus. "They get whatever they need to rebuild. Full cooperative support. No waiting for committee votes. No political process. Full support, immediately, from every resource the cooperative can send." Valoran looked at him. "Done," he said. "And Dr. Nara Vel gets no disciplinary action for what she did," said Marcus. Valoran paused. She did the right thing," said Marcus. "And she's going to have to live with being right about this for the rest of her career, which in my experience is harder than being wrong. She doesn't need disciplinary action on top of that." Valoran thought about this. "Done," he said. Marcus nodded. They stood. Valoran offered his hand, the human gesture he had researched. Marcus took it. Bishop. Welcome to the cooperative, said Valoran. The genuine cooperative. The one that should have sent help when you asked. You sent something better, said Marcus. Eventually. We sent a monster, said Valoran. We were wrong about what that meant. Marcus looked at him. I'm not a monster, he said quietly. No, said Valoran. You are not. 6 months later, Marcus Cole sat in a very different room. Not a cell. Not a colony tunnel. Not a cockpit. An office. A real one in the Cooperative Council's main station with a window that looked out at the slow drift of stars and a desk that was sized for a human and a data pad with a cooperative seal on the case and a title on the door that had taken 14 ambassadors 3 weeks to agree on. Special Operations Liaison, Cooperative Crisis Response Division. The door was open. He had asked for it to be open. It was a small thing. But small things mattered. He had learned that in Montana from a grandmother who collected small things the way other people collected large ones, who said, when he was 7 years old and impatient with the smallness of things, that a person was made of the small things they chose, long before they ever got a chance at the large ones. He thought about her now in the quiet of the office. He thought about the file on his data pad, the new one, the one that had come in this morning from a monitoring station in Sector 11. A situation. A species called the Delvari, a small, isolated people on a planet called Varan 3, who had been reporting increasing aggression from a resource extraction corporation that operated in the Outer Rim and had, according to the monitoring station's report, extremely loose compliance with cooperative trading regulations. 12,000 people on Vega 7. 60,000 Delvari on Varan 3. Different problem. Different tools needed. Different solution. He was already thinking. He pressed the communicator on his desk. Valoran, he said. The ambassador's voice came back, different now than it had been in those first weeks. The particular tension had gone out of it. Not entirely. Marcus suspected the older Ithran would never quite fully relax in his presence, and that was probably reasonable, but the kind of tension that comes from fear had given way to something else. Something that might, with time, approach trust. I see you've read the Varan 3 file, said Valoran. I have, said Marcus. I want to go there. Pause. Diplomatically, said Valoran. Or, diplomatically first, said Marcus. Let's try that. It usually works better when there's time to try it. He paused. If it doesn't work, we'll figure out next steps. The council will need a briefing, said Valoran. I know, said Marcus. I'll have it ready by tomorrow. Tell them I'll keep it short. He could hear the faint sound of Valoran breathing, the particular rhythm of an old diplomat who had spent 3 decades parsing the subtext of what people said and what they meant. Marcus, said Valoran. Yeah. How are you doing? Said Valoran. He looked at the stars outside the window. It was a simple question. A human question, in its way, the kind of question that most cooperative species didn't ask because the asking implied an ongoing interest in the answer that wasn't always comfortable. Valoran had started asking it about 3 months ago, tentatively, like someone practicing a new skill. Marcus had found this unexpectedly moving. Good, he said. And then, because it was true and because truth was the only thing he'd ever really known how to offer, really good. Pause. Good, said Valoran. I'll have the briefing ready by tomorrow, said Marcus. I'll let the council know, said Valoran. The communicator clicked off. Marcus sat with the file for a moment. Then he set it down and turned to the window and looked at the stars, the specific stars of this sector, different from Earth stars, different from Vega 7 stars, the specific stars of a point in the galaxy that was his, now. A place from which he was moving outward, not as a specimen or a weapon or a monster in a box, but as something with a name and a desk and a door that was open.